Okay, last but not least, we'll deal with what's inside the computer. So I have two pretty old MacBook Pros, both loaded with all the same stuff, so if ever one goes down I've got a second. I can also, if CPU's been completely eaten up, especially from Reactor, I can switch and just bring in the other laptop to deal with that one particular problem. So yeah, so Reactor is something that I've used for a long time, decades. Very powerful. For those who don't know it, you can design and create your own synthesizer inside of Native Instruments format, really. And yeah, you just patch things together, and it's quite a sort of fiddly process, but it does teach you a lot about synthesis. But the big strong advantage of this is the Reactor user community, which have created thousands of synths, drum machines, samplers, effects units, controller units, sequencers. There's just mountains of it out there, and I think that's where its strengths lie. So you have to own the full package of Reactor to be able to have access to that library, but I think for one of the sort of paid pieces of software that's out there, I think probably investment in that one is the most worthwhile you could probably do. If the Reactor type sounds is something that you're into, certainly for my music it is. So yeah, so that's Reactor. So my main DAW is Cubase. I've been using that for decades. Started on the Atari ST back in the very early 90s, and it was hooked up to external gear, and I moved on to Apple Macs later on, and I've just sort of stuck with them. Not that I'm particularly a fanboy of Apple. I could quite easily be working on PC. All the stuff that I use actually works on all platforms, so I don't use Logic, I don't use any Mac specific stuff. It's all there for any system. So Cubase is my DAW of choice, just because I've worked with it for so long. I know it inside out. I'm happy with it. It works well for me. I've used all the other DAWs in my job. I have to use Logic. I don't mind it. It's fine. It's got its pluses and minuses like any other DAW. Ableton Live I also use because we have the pushes at work, so I use that. I like Ableton. I think that having Max for Live is pretty good, but because I have Reactor, I've not really felt the need to really go down the route of learning Max as well, even though I've tried a couple of times and found it quite a difficult process. Haven't done it for a few years actually, so I think it's streamlined a little bit in more recent times, but certainly in the old days it was a very uninspiring way of making electronic music, for me anyway. I like to just get in and start making, really. I also use Reason. I've used Reason right back since Rebirth. I've always enjoyed it. I think it's powerful. I think it's a good get up and get going making music piece of software, and I think it's kind of become any equal DAW now with its VST and audio interfaces, which it didn't start with. I think it makes it pretty powerful, but I would still, for me, I still kind of do this strange thing where I still, because of old workflows, I still use the connection through Cubase, so I run it as like almost like a VST synth DAW inside of Cubase. That's just because it's the way I always used to do it, and I'm still happy doing it that way. It works for me. I occasionally make the odd track in Reactor standalone, but I still prefer Cubase. I'm just quicker at it. Then I use Contact for the sort of sampler. I don't like its sampler, but there's a lot of good sample packages that are out there for it, and it's just powerful. So yeah, it's the workflow of it's seems terrible. I don't like its layout, its format, its file system, but it is what it is, and you know, it's useful. I don't have a lot else actually. I did a massive delete of a lot of soft synths and drum machines, just because I found that I had mountains of them. They're all taking up space and I wasn't using them, so I used just reactor contact, and that's it. And then VST plugins, I use lots of freeware plugins that I sort of stumble across, just because they're freeware. They're usually a bit unusual, they're usually a little bit glitchy maybe, so they do something a little unusual. And then I use Reactor for the rest of my VST plugins. So the majority of the tracks that you hear of mine will probably be Reactor plugins, for the main part, controlling most of the effects, sounds and mastering actually. There we go. I do use a couple of the Cubase built-in plugins, but don't use that. Reactor's pretty much my go-to. Then this little thing I use, which I think is quite interesting, interface for sound design. So it's a Leap Motion. For those who've not come across it, it's two little micro cameras. They can see the hand and they can measure movement forwards, backwards, tilt, rise, hand open, hand closed, and that in itself is very cool for sort of virtual reality applications. But the music applications, there's this little piece of software, so as I put my hand over it, you can see that it knows that that's my right hand. If I put my left hand in, it sees my left hand. It should do, there it is, there's my left hand, open, closed. And what you can do is just MIDI learn this stuff, MIDI learn the hand movements to any piece of software. So when you hear my glitchy electronic beats that don't seem to follow any kind of like pattern rules, as a general rule, it's because I'm using this. And this is limitations. It really is very poor in most conditions around light, so it makes it for any kind of smooth movements really poor, and really not rubbish. It's quite cool, but it's definitely got its limitations, especially in low light. And so I find it really interesting because it glitches out and it misreads movement and hand movement, and it jumps around and parameters go a bit crazy. I find this is a really cool way of just introducing glitch and madness to certainly beat patterns mapped to different parameters. So I find this a really useful tool for that reason really alone. But I also use it for like strings, I use it for velocity. It's quite nice just to have that sort of hand movement for velocities. So yeah, that's cool. And they, whilst being expensive when they first came out, they're being forgotten about now, and they're cropping up really cheap on eBay, and there's a lot of them. So if you can pick one up for not very much, I think it's quite worth the money to introduce that to your setup. So yeah, so that's the computer side of things. So if you're interested in any more detail in any of this stuff, or some specific demos on any of the individual things that I've covered in my synths, my computers and my guitar pedals, then yeah, just leave a message in the comments and I'll make a video at a later date around that specific piece of software. But yeah, it's been nice sort of showing you the back end of what I do. If you hear anything that you like amongst my music across my channel, then you know this really is what makes it. At the heart of it is all of this gear, and not really anything else. So yeah, thanks for all the support over the last sort of year or so that I've been running the channel. It's been good, and I hope to bring you many more tunes in the future. So yeah, Doke16 signing out. Oh, and if you're in Gijón next week in Spain, and you see me, then feel free to say hello. I'll be working at the university. It's public event for European, I think there's people coming from France, Ireland, Spain, Portugal, the UK. There's going to be lots of tech. I'm one of a couple of people doing sort of music-based sound design stuff, but there's a lot of other cool and interesting tech that's going to be at this event. So if that's in your neck of the woods, then have a look online for the AYCH Creative Jam in Gijón, northern Spain. Okay, that's it. Thanks a lot.